What's cracking, J-Coders? I'm J-Coding, and after an extremely long hiatus, I am back. I believe the last time I had made a video with you guys was a little over 2 years ago. I was a junior in high school, and since then, I've done a good amount of stuff. Now I'm currently a freshman in computer engineering at the University of Illinois, and since we're all stuck in quarantine, why not pursue some hobbies? And I thought, what better way to pursue a hobby than to teach everyone to program? This series is going to be called the Intro to C programming series in which I teach you guys the basics of C, and then eventually we'll get into some more complicated stuff such as data structures. Now, when it comes to C, it's very interesting in terms of its syntax. Now, for those who don't know, syntax is the language that certain programming languages use. For example, if you've programmed in Python, you'll see some similarities and differences to other languages such as Java, JavaScript, C, or C++. So C has a very unorthodox method in terms of how the user is going to interact with the computer to then output stuff on the screen. Let's get right into the different data types that we can talk about. The first data type that we have is called an integer. Now, what you have to do in C is you have to declare variables. What we're going to do right now is we're going to declare an integer, let's call a, and we're going to set a equal to 5. Now, there's a bunch of things that we can now do with this, right? We have this block of memory stored in our computer that has the number 5. And just for reference, I'm actually programming on an online compiler. I like to use Replit, but honestly, any online C compiler will work. Very easy and efficient to use. So now we have an integer called 5. So what can we do with 5? We can, well, print it to the console. Now, with C, the way we print things is we use the command printf. Now, in printf, you can put just about anything you want. So over here, we're going to always open up the double quotes or single quotes, depending on what you're more used to. We're going to open up double quotes and put %d, and then after the double quotes, we're going to put comma a, and then we're going to end the statement with a semicolon. Now, C is very, very, very strict on how you give it commands. Because it's such an old language, you're going to have to put semicolons at just about every single statement you make. So if I run this, we are expecting 5 to print out, as we can see right here. Let me explain to you guys just exactly how C reads this, right? So the first thing it does is that it comes to our code and it sees we're going into a function called main. And in that function, we're doing something, right? So the first thing we did is we made an integer called a, and a holds the value 5. And all we want to do is print. We want to print the number 5 to the screen using the function printf. Now, every time you want to print something to the screen in C, you're going to have to use the printf function. Now, how do we tell the printf function what to print out? You know, it's not intuitive. We almost have to treat the computer as if it knows absolutely nothing, as if it were a newborn baby, and we have to teach it everything from the second it was born, and it has absolutely no natural human instincts. We're teaching it from the ground up. So there's a function called printf, and in the printf, the first argument is always going to be in double quotes. Now what happens is the computer reads the double quotes and say, okay, this is the block of data that I need to print out. First thing it sees is a percent sign. Now the percent sign is telling the computer, hey, I'm going to tell you what type of data type that we're going to print out. Now anytime I do a %d, that's code for the computer to know that I'm going to be printing out a number or an integer. Now this will only work for integers. If I'm printing out a float, then I'll get an error. So once it sees %d, then since that's all I want to print out, I close the double quotes and I print out a. A, obviously, we know from before, has the number 5 stored into it. If we rerun that, all that happens in the span of the blink of an eye. %d only works with integers. So what if I change this to a float? For those who don't know what a float is, float stands for a floating point integer, where essentially I can put as many decimals as I want. Well, not as many as I want, but for the sake of simplicity, I can print out a decimal number. And if I do %d and print out a, I should get an error. Now we see over here on line 5, it says format specifies type int, but the argument, and the argument is the stuff that's inside the parentheses, has type float. And because Replit is such a smart compiler, it suggests what we should put in place of %d. Now, anytime we print out a float, we have to put %f, and that should just about deal with all of our problems. Now, there are actually many different types of data types that we can print out. Now, we can also print out another data type, such as a char. Now, what we have to do with a char is we have to put this little star right in front of the variable name. Now, what a char is, for those who don't know, is just a simple character. All it does is it prints out one character at a time. So in this case, we want to print out H space, and what C does is it automatically ignores the space. What is this star right here? Now, what this star is essentially, it's called a pointer, and it points to the address in our computer which holds the letter H. What the computer does is when I say char star A, is it makes a space in our computer labeled as A, and every space in our computer has an address that the computer knows about, and in that space we have the letter H. So now when we print it out, we do %C because that's the code that you use to print out a char, and the second argument that we pass is the pointer A. So if we run that, it should print out just H. Now, there are many different ways that we can print out a string of letters in C, but it's not as straightforward as other programs where you can just type in string and then %s and then everything works. Because what we'd have to do with string, two things. Either A, we type the string right into here, or we have to print out an array of chars. Now, we'll get to arrays in another video, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just type strings straight into the print. So we have this print statement that says, hello world. Usually we have two arguments in the printf function, but in this we only have one, because essentially we're not telling the computer to access anything beyond this print statement. All we're telling the computer to do is simply print out the phrase, hello world. We can actually do a lot of things, which is why C is very, very versatile. With this print statement, we can print out words with numbers, we can print out words with chars, we can essentially do whatever we want with this now. So what if we said, hello world, I'm number, and then %d. And if we do this %d, what happens is, when it reads this statement, it says, okay, I'm printing out hello, now I'm printing out world, I'm number, oh, I'm reading a %sign. That means I'm looking for a variable that the user, which is me or the programmer, is telling the computer to print out. Now, we'll just say we're going to end up making a variable called A. So up here, before the print statement, we'll make a variable called A and set it equal to 5. So now when we run this, it should say, hello world, I'm number 5. Yep, and that's exactly that printed out. So now we've seen some of the basic stuff that the print function can do. Now let's get into some more complicated or diverse things that the print statement can do. So what we're going to do is we want to print everything on a new line. Now what we need to do is put inline text. In this case, it's going to be, I believe that's a /n, or whatever slash that is, n. So whenever the computer reads that, it's going to automatically go to the next line. Instead of making multiple print statements, we can go to different lines within the same print statement. So there should be a new line after hello, and we'll make a new line after number. So when you print again, it says hello, and notice there's an extra space here, because when I printed out hello, and I put a new line, I left a space in between worlds, so it's almost indented. And the same thing with number, I left a little space right here, so it printed out with a little indent. So the last thing that I want to show you guys about the print function is that it can actually print out more than one variable. For example, if I want to print out a comma b, where I make another variable called int b is equal to 6. Now, what C does is it reads these percentage signs and it stores it into these variables in the order that they appear. So if I say I'm number %d, and I like the number %d. Now what happens is it sees the first %d and automatically it stores it in A, and then it sees the second %d and it automatically stores it in B. So if we run this, it says hello, weird indent world, I'm number, weird indent 5, and I like the number 6. Now, the last thing that we can do is we can also print out multiple different data types. So the other data type that we learned today was a char. So if we do %c with this, and my favorite number is %c, and I call it s, right? So I make another char s is equal to s. Why did I say number? I meant letter, right? So I have to make sure char is a pointer, both here, and I have to make sure I also put a semicolon at the end. Now you notice when I run this, it automatically gives me an error, right? Because I said %c and I'm calling for a char, and I'm calling s right here. Now, it flagged me and said, hey, you're saying s, and s is supposed to be a char, meaning you did this wrong. So I should call the pointer the address that is labeled s and contains the letter s. So if I run this, it says, I like the number 6, and my favorite letter is s. So that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm definitely going to be trying to make more and more of these videos. I'm going to make as many videos of C as possible. Then I'm going to try to switch to C++ before finally going to Python. That's it for me today. Peace.